right, everyone, this is Matt Lengel again with Denver Private Wealth Management, coming to you with the next video in our series surrounding demystifying private investments. In some of our previous videos, we've talked about what exactly the private investment universe is, as well as some different asset classes that make up the private investment universe. This one specifically, we're going to talk about the asset class of infrastructure. So as a reminder, within the infrastructure asset class, today we're going to be looking at brownfield equity and greenfield equity, and you'll notice that that's going to be really looking at, in terms of where it's going to be positioned within your portfolio, enhanced income to capital growth, capital appreciation, and we'll break down the two. So before I start to talk about what exactly brownfield equity is and greenfield equity is, I want to first start to break down what the issue is that infrastructure is solving and how you can create a return off of it. McKinsey put out a study, as you'll notice here on this left graph, that shows that from 2017 to 2035, on average, there's going to need to be an additional $3.7 trillion pumped into the global infrastructure every single year. And this graph does a good job representing how that money is going to be broken out. So, just under $1 trillion will need to be pumped into our roads, our highway systems, railroads, seaports, airports, power, water, telecom. We can look at this just in the U.S. and start to understand that you start to see cracks on your local roads and your highways, and airports that are starting to fall apart, things like that. Where as these things start to ail and the population of the world continues to grow more and more, there's more of a demand from an infrastructure standpoint for all these countries to meet the needs of the growing population that they have. But then also, our highway system was created in the 1950s. So, now it's 50, 60, 70 years old. There's a lot of money that needs to get pumped back in to meet with demand of the growing global population. If you look on the right, you'll notice that, down here, about 63% of the additional investment needed is going to be in emerging economies. So you start looking at places like, Western Europe, Africa, India, Middle East, Latin America, things like that, where, some of these economies and in these countries are developing at a rapid pace, and they need to keep up with the explosion of population and the explosion of economic growth from an infrastructure standpoint to meet those demands. The problem being is, think about $3.7 trillion. That is a lot of money every single year to be outlaying on keeping up with infrastructure. And so some of these countries are realizing they don't have in their budget, and the only way to meet the need of this growing demand is by partnering with private investments and private money in order to build some of this infrastructure, some of these systems. Now, before I go into some of the return characteristics of it, I mentioned brownfield equity and greenfield equity. So as an example, brownfield equity would be taking in already established infrastructure. So think of an ailing airport. So taking an ailing airport and either revamping it, making it better, or repurposing it, taking it from an airport to a civic center, for instance. Just as an example, taking something that's already in place and has structure to it, and then making it better, pumping money in to make it better. Greenfield equity, on the other chance, while more risky, can potentially produce a higher level of return. That's going to be ground up. So that's where there was no airport there to begin with, but because of demand, they recognize that they need to create an airport, and you're building it from the ground up. Greenfield, it's a green field, and they need to build the infrastructure needed. Greenfield equity is going to produce higher levels of return than brownfield equity, but also with 1 to 2% more risk due to construction costs and costs of materials, timber, steel, things like that, these commodities. So that fluctuation in price creates an extra level of risk for your investment. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of the need that needs to be solved with infrastructure investing, let's look at some of the historical returns. So you'll notice that there's high single digits to low single digit returns made up of total return equals cash flow plus appreciation. And specifically when it comes to infrastructure, there's a decent income clip that comes off of these investments, as well as some capital appreciation in there as well. And so let's put this a little more tangible. So when I say investing in infrastructure and having some income, a perfect example would be, well, let's say India needs a new highway system. and they're struggling to fill the need from a monetary standpoint of building those highways. Well, if private money came in and helped build out the highway system, and as people drive on those highways, and they're going to go on toll roads, right? So there's a toll to get onto the highway, and so if private money can get a piece of the tolls that are collected, that's going to be a consistent revenue for them, a consistent income that they're going to find very attractive. And so with infrastructure, there's usually a decent amount of income that you're looking at within those investments. What's also of note here is, while some of the other graphs and some of the other investments we talk about will date back, return histories of 20, 30 plus years, infrastructure is actually going to be the most recent asset class to get into private investments. We didn't really see infrastructure come into play until more like the mid 2000s. And because it's so new, it's really just starting to hit the scene and become more and more popular because of that demand we talked about over the next 20 plus years due to that McKinsey study in the previous slide. Finally, what is going to make infrastructure so popular is due to the uncorrelated returns that we see due to public stocks. So if you've been following along in the series, the main focus here is the asset allocation, uncorrelated return drivers, return streams, right? So within your portfolio, you're always going to be wrong at some point. So you want things that aren't related to the success of, or the demise of each other asset class. And greenfield infrastructure equity, you'll notice, is the least correlated investment to your public stock core portfolio. That's going to make this incredibly attractive when we start thinking about different return drivers, especially potentially high single digit, low single digit returns that are the least correlated from what's going on in your core public stock portfolio. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a better idea of what infrastructure investing is within the private investment universe. As always, please feel free to reach out. We would love to discuss more about how some of these investments can fit within your overall portfolio and answer any other questions you may have. Thank you.